Hello and welcome. In today's discussion, we'll be addressing a pressing issue, oil theft in Nigeria and its implications for national security, the way forward. Oil theft not only robs the nation of critical revenue, but also fuels insecurity, organized crime, and economic instability. We'll break down how this illegal activity impacts the nation's security framework and explore effective strategies to combat it. If you believe that tackling oil theft requires collective awareness and action, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on important discussions like this. Also, share this podcast with your friends and networks, because creating a secure and prosperous Nigeria starts with informed conversations. Let's dive right in.
Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something might seem like just local crime at first glance, but trust me, it goes way deeper than that. Oil theft in Nigeria.
Yeah.
You might be thinking, okay, what does that have to do with me? But get this. It's got huge implications for Nigeria, obviously, but also the global economy, global security, even the environment. And we're going to be diving deep into some sources that really lay out just how crazy this problem is. Like, for example, did you know that Nigeria is losing up to like 400,000 barrels of oil every single day to theft?
Yeah.
That's enough to, like, I don't even know, fuel a small city or something.
That's insane.
It just gone, vanished.
It really is a staggering number when you think about it.
Yeah. So let's get into it. So, the sources you sent me, they describe these like pretty sophisticated methods that these oil thieves are using. I mean, they're tapping pipelines in these like super remote areas. It's like almost impossible to catch them.
It's incredible the lengths they go to.
Yeah, it's like a whole operation.
Oh, absolutely. This is not some small-time thing.
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me, and also kind of terrifying, is the scale of it.
Yeah.
We're talking billions, with a B, billions of dollars lost annually.
Oh, wow.
Think about that. Like, imagine that kind of leak in your bank account.
Don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, it's not a good feeling.
No, not at all. But it's not just the money, right? It's the ripple effects this has on Nigeria's ability to deal with other issues.
Exactly.
Right? You're dealing with so much already.
This revenue loss essentially cripples the Nigerian government. It makes it so much harder to tackle things like Boko Haram.
Right.
Or the banditry that's just rampant in certain regions.
And then it's a cycle, too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because the instability makes oil theft more appealing.
Yeah, it creates this downward spiral.
So it's like a self-perpetuating problem.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, we have groups like the Niger Delta Avengers. I mean, these guys are actively using oil theft to fund their operations. They attack oil infrastructure. They attack security forces. I mean, it's just adding to the chaos.
Yeah, they're a major player in this whole situation.
Yeah, and their motives are complex too, right? It's not just about greed.
It's a really interesting mix.
Yeah.
I mean, they claim to be fighting for the rights of the Niger Delta communities.
Right, they've been hit hard by all this.
Who have really borne the brunt of the environmental damage caused by the oil industry.
Yeah.
So they've seen their land contaminated by oil spills, their water polluted, their livelihoods destroyed. So it's this mix of anger, frustration, and desperation.
Yeah, you can see how that would lead people to take extreme measures.
Absolutely. It's a complex situation with no easy answers.
So if we want to even start figuring out how to address this problem, we need to understand all the players involved, right?
That's the first step.
Yeah, because it's not just a few individuals, it's a whole organized operation.
Oh, yeah. The sources you shared really point to this complex network of actors, all intertwined in this illegal trade.
Yeah, it's like a whole ecosystem almost.
It is a very well-oiled machine, if you'll pardon the pun.
Okay, so let's break down this network. Who are the key players?
Well, you've got your community bunkering network, the ones physically involved in the theft,
Right.
tapping into the pipelines, refining the stolen oil, transporting it.
And a lot of these people are from the very communities that are impacted by the oil industry.
Exactly. Often the ones who are suffering the most from the environmental damage.
So it's like they're almost forced into this situation, in a way.
In some cases, yeah, they see oil theft as a way to survive.
Like get a share of the wealth they feel has been denied to them.
Right.
It's a dangerous way to make a living, obviously illegal, but for some it seems like the only option.
Yeah, when you're desperate, you do what you have to do.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine being in that position, feeling like you have no other choice. But it's not just about local communities, is it?
No, it goes much deeper than that.
Like there's a whole other layer of involvement here.
Absolutely. There's complicity that goes beyond these local networks.
Okay.
We're talking about corrupt officials within the Nigerian government.
Oh, wow.
Security forces, regulatory agencies, even employees of the oil companies themselves.
So this corruption runs deep.
Yeah, it does. These officials turn a blind eye to the oil theft. Sometimes they even actively participate in it in exchange for bribes, kickbacks.
It's like they're enabling the whole operation.
They are. They're making it even harder to combat this problem.
So we have local communities, corrupt officials, and it doesn't stop there, right? This stolen oil has to go somewhere.
Exactly. It doesn't end at Nigeria's borders.
Yeah.
The sources also highlight the involvement of international criminal syndicates.
Oh, wow.
They're the ones who facilitate the smuggling of this stolen oil onto the global black market.
So what seems like a local crime is actually feeding into this much larger global network.
Yeah, it's a truly global problem.
So we're talking about a local problem with global consequences. It seems pretty overwhelming. Where do we even begin to tackle something this complicated?
It's a tough one. There's no easy fix. But the sources you sent do outline a few promising approaches. They emphasize that a successful strategy needs to tackle this problem on multiple fronts.
Okay, that makes sense.
It has to be a multi-pronged approach.
All right, so let's dive into that.
So one of the key areas the sources highlight is law enforcement. They really need to step up their game.
Okay.
We're talking better surveillance,
Right.
using things like drones to monitor these pipelines in these remote areas.
I mean, that would make sense. It's so hard to patrol those areas on foot.
Exactly. But even more crucial, I think, is cracking down on the corruption within the security forces themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it feels like if you have corrupt officials looking the other way, it almost doesn't matter what other strategies you have in place.
It's like trying to build a dam while there are leaks in the foundation.
Right, exactly.
But it's not enough to just play whack-a-mole with the criminals.
Right.
We need to think long-term,
Okay.
address the root causes.
The root causes of why people are turning to this in the first place. So we're talking about like the poverty, the lack of opportunities, the environmental damage. That's pushing people towards this.
Exactly.
Okay.
We need community engagement,
Okay.
working with these communities, not against them,
So giving people a real alternative.
helping them build sustainable livelihoods that don't rely on this dangerous and illegal trade.
So it's about making oil theft less appealing by making the legitimate options better.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then on a larger scale, Nigeria really needs to diversify its economy.
Oh, yeah, I mean, they're so reliant on oil.
Right now, they're incredibly dependent on oil revenue, which makes them all the more vulnerable to this kind of theft.
Yeah, that's true.
Investing in other sectors would not only create new opportunities for people, but it would also reduce the country's overall dependence on oil.
Okay, so that's stronger law enforcement, community engagement, economic diversification. What else? Because it seems like this problem goes beyond Nigeria's borders.
You're absolutely right. Given the involvement of these international criminal networks, the sources really stress the need for international cooperation.
Okay.
This means cracking down on the global black market for stolen oil
Right.
and strengthening maritime security to prevent smuggling.
It sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is, but it's necessary.
But even within this like larger framework, the sources also point to some more specific, targeted strategies. Like, what are some of the more, I don't know, innovative or surprising ideas that are being proposed?
Well, one that I found really interesting was the idea of establishing these designated transit corridors for oil tankers.
Okay.
So the idea is to make it harder to kind of blend stolen oil in with legitimate shipments.
Ah, so it's like creating a controlled environment where it's harder to hide this illegal activity.
Exactly. And then they're also proposing mandatory decommissioning of abandoned oil wells.
Okay.
A lot of theft happens from these neglected wells. So properly sealing them off could really reduce opportunities for criminals.
Yeah, less opportunity, less crime. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there any like tech-based solutions that are being considered?
The sources talk about using armed drones and early warning systems to enhance security around pipelines.
Okay.
It could be a more efficient way to patrol these vast remote areas.
That sounds effective. But it also makes me think about the potential for escalation. Like, do we really want to be in a situation where we're using armed drones against people stealing oil?
Yeah, it's a valid concern. There are definitely ethical considerations to weigh there. And then there are more economic approaches, like addressing the fuel scarcity issue in Nigeria could also make a difference.
Okay, how so?
Well, if people have reliable access to affordable, legitimate fuel, the market for stolen oil shrinks.
Right. You reduce the demand, you reduce the incentive.
Exactly.
What about like working directly with the people who are transporting this stolen oil?
Yeah, the sources mention sensitizing tanker owners to the consequences of their actions, making them aware of the ethical and legal implications, and also working with community leaders to discourage complicity in oil theft.
So it's kind of a combination of deterrence and education.
Yeah, exactly. It's a
Wow.
multi-layered approach. But ultimately, one of the key takeaways from these sources is that oil theft isn't just about stealing oil.
Right. It's connected to so much more.
It's a symptom of much deeper systemic issues within Nigeria.
So the poverty, the inequality, the environmental damage, the lack of trust in institutions, it's all feeding into this cycle of crime and violence.
It's like a tangled knot. You can't just address one strand without considering how it's intertwined with all the others.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how complicated this whole issue is. Like, you can't just look at oil theft in isolation.
Right, it's all connected.
It's all these other challenges that Nigeria is facing.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the most valuable insights from these sources. Real lasting solutions. They have to address those root causes.
Yeah, you can't just focus on catching the criminals. You have to, like, create a system where oil theft is less appealing in the first place.
Less necessary.
Less profitable.
Exactly.
And it makes you realize that this isn't just about, like, lost revenue or even environmental damage. It's about people's lives, their livelihoods, their hopes for the future.
Absolutely, and it also highlights the interconnectedness of things. You know, what seems like a local crime in the Niger Delta, it actually has ripple effects that are felt globally.
Right. It's a good reminder that we're all part of this larger system.
Okay.
So as we kind of resurface from this deep dive into oil theft in Nigeria, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners left with?
I think the most important one is that complexity. This isn't a simple problem with a simple solution.
Right.
It's a web of interconnected issues, and tackling it requires that multifaceted approach.
And it's not just about Nigeria, right? This has implications for global security, for the environment, for the fight against corruption.
It's a global problem that demands global solutions.
But it also starts with understanding, the nuances, the motivations, the human stories behind the headlines. I think that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. They allow us to really explore an issue, move beyond the surface, and grapple with that complexity. So to kind of wrap things up, is there a final thought, a question you'd like to leave our listener with, something to kind of ponder as they go about their day?
Yeah, I think a good question to consider is this. If you were in a position of power, if you had the resources and the influence to make a difference, where would you start? What would be your first step in tackling this whole multifaceted challenge of oil theft in Nigeria? What seems most promising to you, and what obstacles do you anticipate facing?
That's a great question to reflect on. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been really eye-opening exploring this complex issue. And to you, listening, thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.